What's up guys, it's Chili here. Today I'm going to be doing a tier list for the best and worst civs in AOE4. This time around we're going to be including the new Sultans Ascend civs. We did get 6 new civs added to the game. That's 2 completely original civs, Japan and the Byzantines, as well as 4 civ variants of existing civs in the game. And I'll be rating all of them and seeing which ones are the best design as well as the worst design. At the top of this, I am changing the ranking style a little bit. So instead of A, B, C, D, E, we're going to have at the very top, wouldn't change a thing, then almost perfect, good enough, meh, and then on the bottom is back to the drawing board. I do hope that down the line the devs will consider rejigging some of the civs and seeing if they can play a little bit differently, because I do think some of the civs could use a little bit of a retouch up. Now, how am I going to be judging these civs? Well, there are going to be 3 main categories I'm going to be considering. Those are accuracy, how true to history is it, so historical authenticity, and then game feel, how good does it feel to play, is the design clunky, am I struggling to deal with the mechanics of the game when I'm playing the civ, and then lastly is thematics. Does this civ satisfy the fantasy of the civilization? How much does the historical authenticity tie into the game feel? And with that, it's, you know, a lot of it's also going to be kind of, you know, just based on how I feel about the civ, and we'll kind of see how we feel as we get through it. Yeah, let's just get right into it. Let's start with the Byzantines first. So I'll take all these civs off of the list first, and we will talk about the Byzantines. Now, the Byzantines were one of the most highly requested civs to be added to AOE4. It's kind of a shocker that it wasn't already added in the base game. It was one of the most popular civs back into AOE2. I was very, very excited for the Byzantines to be added. Everyone, you know, loves to roleplay as the Romans. Everyone's thinking about the Roman Empire all the time. So it's really, really awesome that they finally added this civ, and I was so excited about it that I actually created my own concept. I think my second civ concept I've ever made. I make a lot of civilization concepts. You can check those out on my website. I think I will put the link to my website in the description below. But I made a lot of concepts, and I think the second concept I ever made was actually for the Byzantines, because I was so excited about their potentially being added into the game. And actually with my concept, I had a very similar idea to what the Byzantines would end up becoming. I talked about having Varangian guards, cataphracts, chirosiphons. All those things seem pretty standard for any kind of Byzantine civ that you would imagine, but the things that really stood out to me were that the fact that they also went with the cisterns and the aqueducts that kind of wind throughout your base. That was something that I posted. I actually posted a concept for the Byzantines literally the night before the Byzantines got announced, and you can actually check it out in my videos, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I was talking about winding aqueducts and cisterns, and they ended up making something very, very similar, and I'm really, really excited about that. It almost makes me wonder if they see my concepts. But I'm very happy with how this civ was designed. The base building aspect is amazing. The historical authenticity feels pretty damn good. There's a lot of things that are just right on the money. The way the cataphracts look and feel, the way the Varangian guard feel, all of it really, really, really top notch. I love that you have to think about how you want to plan out your base with this civ, the way you have to plan out your cisterns and aqueducts, and figure out, you know, which setting to have the cistern on. All of that feels really, really good. It makes you feel like kind of like a genius if you're playing this civ. This civ is definitely one of those civs that requires a PhD to play. That's like the big meme, and I totally think it applies here. And it's also a really versatile civ, which is kind of cool. It kind of reminds me how back in Mountain Blade, the Empire in that game is one of the factions in that game, and basically their thing is that they have good units for pretty much everything. They're the jack of all trades, not necessarily the master of any one, and that's kind of how the Byzantines feel here. They are pretty good in all capacities, and that's mainly enabled by their mercenaries. Now, the mercenaries are something that I'm not feeling quite as much. Now, the Byzantines historically did use a lot of mercenaries, but I don't think they use the mercenaries that they have in the game. We have like Gulams and Keshiks and Spahi and javelin throwers, Chinese grenadiers, just units that didn't really historically interact with the Byzantines all that much, especially in the H4 landmark for the Byzantines. You can build like nest of bees, like Chinese gunpowder weapons. That would never happen. Gunpowder was a very tightly held Chinese state secret, so it's really confusing why they would make a whole landmark that kind of gives you gunpowder units from other civs. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And on top of that, the mercenaries are also paid by olive oil, and the whole emphasis on olive oil as an additional resource, the fifth resource for the Byzantines, is a little bit confusing. Like, olive oil was definitely a big part of the Byzantine economy back then, but I don't think that mercenaries were paid by olive oil. I mean, someone who knows more might correct me on this, but it just doesn't seem all that plausible to me. So the mercenaries, I feel like the fact that you can get unique units from all the other civs kind of takes away from the civ diversity, the uniqueness of seeing those units with those other civs. When you see Nest of Bees, it's like not as uniquely a Chinese thing anymore, and that kind of feels a little bad in my opinion. Kind of blurs the lines a little bit, especially when I see like Byzantine longbows like just trouncing English longbows. It just feels really weird. And the mercs that were really prominently used, like for instance Genoese crosswomen, which in the game the closest thing is probably the arbitraire, the French arbitraire. That's not even accessible as one of the base mercenary companies. Instead, you have to actually build your mercenary camp right next to a trading post, and then that's how you access that unit. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, that unit would be kept behind that door over there, while javelin throwers is one of your base feudal units that you can get access to. Like, the thought of like Beninese javelin throwers being used by the Byzantines just doesn't make any sense at all. So anyways, enough rambling on this. I'm gonna place it in the almost perfect category. There's so many things that this civ design got completely right, but just a little bit with the mercenaries, I feel like I would have liked to see it change, especially down the line. If they add new civs to the game, I wonder how the Byzantine mercenary roster is going to be updated down the line. I would love to see, for instance, like Spanish Almogavars. Very famously, there was a company known as the Castilian Company, which was a group of Spanish Almogavars that worked for the Byzantines. Wreaked all sorts of havoc in Asia Minor back in the day. So I would love to see them represented whenever Spain and or maybe Portugal gets added to the game. Next up, let's take a look at Japan. All right, I'll just place it here starting out, and then we'll see how we feel about this. So for Japan, this is another one of the fan favorite civs. A lot of people got the expansion basically just because Japan got added to the game. Obviously a very popular civ. It was popular in AOE3, AOE2. Actually, AOE3, they gave Japan like everything. Japan just like has the best of everything in AOE2. In AOE3, that was really annoying. And that's sort of what they did with AOE4 here. Japan does have pretty much the best of everything in every category. They have like some amazing spearmen. They have really strong heavy infantry. The Onobugeisha are basically like infantry that serve as cavalry. It's kind of insane. They have strong archers. The Yumi archers are low-key underrated. The Onamusha are they're very unique, but they're maybe one of the weak points of Japan. And then the mounted samurai are just like, why did this faction get mounted samurai, like really strong heavy cavalry? It doesn't make any sense to me. Japan historically, yes, there is the presence of cavalry, but especially in the Sengoku Jidai, you have the Warring States period with what's his name, Takeda. He had like a contingent of cavalry that was really famous, but like that, a lot of that mostly boils down to just legend, and it's historically Japan basically just had light cavalry and a lot of horse archers. That was kind of their focus. The Japanese horses just were too wild and too small to be domesticated into these like heavy charger breeds that you would see on the Eurasian continent. So it doesn't really make sense that Japan would have such strong mounted samurai, like these heavy cavalry with barding and everything. The armor that they're wearing in the Imperial Age, the elite mounted samurai with the golden crested dragon face on the horse, like that is actually based on a real historical model in the museum, but it's very rare. Like that's like probably the one case where you had that armor. It's not something that you'd have whole units of, so it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But there's also a lot of things that this Civ does really, really right. I love that like Samurai and Onobugeisha have this like very unique pairing where like it's almost like a husband and wife kind of feel, where the Samurai are kind of the tanky guys and the Onobugeisha are kind of the DPS guys, and you just make this infantry ball and just like a move into the enemy base. That feels really good. It's a little bit weird that there's so many Onobugeisha. Onobugeisha were the warrior women of Japan, and yes, women would take up arms to fight when the men went off to war, but they were not half of the whole military. That feels a little bit strange. Also the presence of the Onomusha, which are like warrior women shooting arrows on horseback, that being the first mounted crossbow unit added to AOE4 also feels a little bit strange, especially since they're just using bows that somehow deal bonus damage to armor. In my concept for Japan, I also struggled a little bit for this because Japan historically did not really make use of crossbows. Japan just didn't have the they didn't have the manufacturing available to mass-produce crossbows the way like China did, and that's not because they didn't know about crossbows. It's just that the infrastructure that they had on the island, the agriculture that they had, they didn't really use a lot of animal products on the island. So as a result, they didn't have the sinews and the materials that they needed to mass produce those crossbows. What they did have instead was a lot of farms, and that is kind of a cool thing about this Civ design, is that the way that you upgrade the Shogunate Castle buffs up the farming around your main TC, around any TC that gets buffed up rather. And as a result, you are really heavily incentivized to make a lot of farms around your TC, which kind of creates this cool little island. You have like a little island of farms, and that's like it's really well defended, and that's where your kind of base building is kind of focused on. So rather than the Byzantines, where they have to sprawl out with a bunch of different cisterns all over the place wherever they want to collect resources, the Japanese just kind of have this really centralized a small pocket that they defend really well, which is kind of reminiscent of like Japanese isolationism. So that's really cool that they went with that theme. That feels really good. And also the reliance on rice here, on cultivating farms and rice, is really cool because medieval Japan was all about the rice. Whoever controlled the most koku, which is like the rice tax, is basically the most powerful lord. And so it's really cool to see that represented in the game. I'm actually going to place this ultimately just ahead of the Byzantines. I think most things they did really, really right with this Civ. Just the mounted samurai are kind of making me feel a little bit, I don't like the direction they went with the Japanese cavalry. Now let's go into the variant Civs. We'll talk about the Order of the Dragon first. So for Order of the Dragon, this is the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire variant. It is a very, very random Civ to pick, or in this case, a knightly order. It is a very obscure knightly order as far as knightly orders go. They had an obvious slam dunk with the Teutonic Knights. Like that would have been an amazing, like if they wanted to go for like a Giga Chad, like elite order of like small number of troops but like super elite, like the Teutonic Knights are like right there. They speak German. They're basically a German colony in Prussia, fighting the Latvians and the Lithuanians, and it was like, it's just perfect, and everyone wants to see the Teutonic Knights represented in the game. They're actually in the game. They actually appear in the campaign, but they didn't end up making a Civ about it. It's so weird, and they were actually even in AOE2 as well, if I recall correctly. I don't know why they went with Order of the Dragon. It's such a weird direction. The one historical reference here is that the Dracula's father is a part of the Order of the Dragon, and that's why his name is Dracul. He was known as the Dracul, and his son became known as Dracula, and that's it. But like it's such an obscure random reference. And also, this order was not very particularly powerful. I mean, it was sort of a thing, but it's mostly just like a nobles cool club. It's not like this order was like far-reaching and like conquered lands or anything like that. So I don't know, whatever. They probably just picked this order because it sounded cool-ish, and maybe people don't know enough about it, so they don't have too many expectations about what this Civ should look like. But on the gameplay side, I actually do like this Civ design a lot. The gimmick is really straightforward. It's, you have much stronger units, but they are more expensive, and they also take up more population space. So you have fewer units, but each one is a lot stronger. That's a really cool concept. That's something that, with that one tiny twist, it completely changes up the way you think about doing everything with the Civ, which greatly, and when you play the Civ, it greatly contrasts with how you play HRE. It's probably the Civ variant that plays the most differently from its baseline Civ, especially since Order of the Dragon has much stronger ranged units and cavalry compared to HRE, which is mostly focused on infantry. So all of that plays really interestingly. I would say on the gameplay side, I really, really like the design of the Civ. The one thing that I don't like is that usually one of the skills that you learn in the game is that when you see one army match up against another army, you should have an idea of like who's gonna win just based on looking at the army comps. In Order kind of like messes that up a little bit, since each unit is worth a little bit more than you think it would be worth. It's a little bit hard for newer players to kind of judge whether or not they're going to win a fight against the Order. That is a little bit unideal, but it's not too big of a deal ultimately. I would say history-wise could be better, but I like the concept on the gameplay side. So overall, I think I would put this in good enough. Like, I would personally have wanted a more historically interesting faction represented here, but as far as the gameplay goes, I like that it adds something very new and very different to the game. All right, let's look at the Ayyubids next. So I'll place it here just temporarily. The Ayyubids are the variant for the Abbasids. Now, this faction is historically a real dynasty. A lot of the fans in the discussions that were happening when the variants were being announced, a lot of people were very excited that the Ayyubids were being added. I think originally this Civ was going to be called the Sultan's Army or something like that. I think a reference to Saladin, but they ended up changing it to the Ayyubids because the Ayyubids are the dynasty of Saladin, and it's maybe a little bit more historically, a better historical reference here. It is a little bit weird that the Abbasids in the game are known as the Abbasid dynasty, and the Ayyubids are just known as the Ayyubid. They're not called the Ayyubid dynasty. That's a little bit strange, but not too big of a deal. But actually, so historically, very cool. But beyond that, there's not a lot I like about this Civ. It plays like just Abbasid, but like more. It doesn't feel like it brings many things that are new to the table here. I mean, it does have a lot of unique units, and it does have more of an emphasis on camels. That's kind of its big differentiating factor from the Abbasids. The Abbasids are a little bit better with infantry, especially with their archers. They're a lot stronger. But at the same time, like, the Ayyubids are just, I don't know, they just kind of feel like a better Abbasid, or like smoother, faster Abbasid. Their fast castle timing is just stupid fast. That shit needs to be nerfed. The bonus siege weapons that they get, the Manjanique and the Sultans Tower, I think it's called. Those units are cool. They're really cool, and I like that they're adding flavor to the game. But they're not necessarily the very civilization defining. They're not the things that really define the Civ. The things that really define the Civ right now is that the Age of Mechanic, it still uses the House of Wisdom, but now there's 8 different options, which is, in my opinion, kind of a lazy design. It's not all that exciting. It doesn't necessarily feel all that good, and there's basically like one right answer. And the way you balance it is there's gonna have to be just like a couple right answers. It doesn't have too much. Some of the age up options are just not that interesting. Like the blacksmith upgrade one is just really snooze fest. The gambling wing, that one is like particularly just bad for the game, in my opinion. Like, especially when they came out with it and they had the villagers that you could spawn, that was so just unhealthy. And like, I think in this game there could be a civilization that's built around a civilization with a gambling mechanic, where you can gamble for extra resources, or get some kind of unique bonuses or something like that. But I feel like the whole Civ needs to be kind of designed around that gambling mechanic. You can't just have one wing just give you these random bonuses, and you might choose it, you might not, and it might like completely change the game if you roll good, or it might completely fuck you if you roll bad. Like, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to be adding to this civ. So I honestly, overall, I really don't like this civ design. It is lazy. It is thematically just overlapping with the Abbasids significantly, and it just has a lot of, in my opinion, very, very poorly implemented ideas that don't really help the game, and potentially box in future creative options in the for where this game's going to go in the future, for future civs rather. All right, Jeanne d'Arc. I want to talk about this civ next. Jeanne d'Arc is a very controversial civ, to say the least. I'm probably the most hated civ on the ladder right now. I think a lot of people are very unhappy with this civ, and it makes sense. You know, it's also based on the it's a variant of the French, which are probably the most hated base civ in the game, and Jeanne d'Arc just kind of takes what the French do and cranks it up to 11. It's more knights, more raiding your base, more bullshit with just running away with a lead, because Jeanne d'Arc can level up and just get insanely powerful way earlier than you can even age up and defend against it. It's a lot of bullshit, and it also makes you play very differently. I definitely think that some balancing here could be tweaked a little bit to make Jeanne feel a little bit less oppressive, especially towards newer players, the lower elos. I think that there's a lot of people justifiably complaining about it, because it is such a different playstyle that you have to adapt to, and it also is particularly hard to play against in, say, like team games where there's a lot of fighting happening, a lot of experience for Jeanne to get, and where she can make a really, really big impact if she is left unchanged. Her leveling up system is neat. I like that you can choose between different options each time she levels up. But there's kind of like one right answer right now. There's not a lot of like situations where you would pick one or the other. You more or less just go the melee version of Jeanne d'Arc, and then you get the men-at-arms to destroy all the spearmen, and then you just pump out cannons at the end. It's kind of a brain-dead direction to go in. I would like to see Jeanne get balanced a little bit so that you do have to be a little bit more strategic about which options you want to pick down the line. But, and perhaps this is a little bit controversial for me to say, overall, I actually am pretty happy with this civ design. Similar to the Order, it takes one thing, and maybe it's a little bit of a gimmick, but it takes that one thing and just adds it to the game, and it makes you completely think about playing the civ in a completely different way. And I think that's what variants should do. They should be relatively straightforward and adding a couple changes that just make you completely think about everything a little bit differently, but while keeping the same identity-ish of the base civ. So for instance, in this civ, your landmarks are the same, but you're thinking the thinking that you're doing is completely different. You're thinking about Jeanne d'Arc the whole time. You're thinking about her abilities. You don't get the eco bonuses that the base French civ has, so you're reliant on Jeanne d'Arc's ability to consecrate buildings, and in order for her to consecrate buildings and build up those charges, you need to keep her alive, you need to level her up, you need to keep up the pace with where you are on the map. You want to go hunt the deer, hunt the wolves, hunt the boar. It's just a very, very different kind of mindset to have, and I think that's good for the game. I think it adds a lot of interesting flavor. Just the balancing needs to be tweaked just a little bit. So actually, I'm gonna be placing this civ in where it is right now, just good enough. I'm pretty happy with this civ. Just needs to be balanced just a little bit better. All right, lastly is the Jushi civ, Jushi's Legacy. This is the variant for China, and I think I'm just gonna say, spoiler alert, I really don't like this civ. This is probably, in my opinion, the worst civ added to the game. It is the worst variant by far. It is literally just better China. There's no difference between how you would think about playing this civ versus thinking about how to play China. It's just everything that China does, but better and smoother. Yes, like it has some different units, it has some different landmarks. That's neat and all, but it doesn't really affect how you feel about this civ. Like whenever I think I want to play China, I'm just thinking, well, I might as well just play Jushi. The only difference is like, okay, China gets the Barbican and it gets the Great Wall Gatehouse. Do I want those things? Not really. Then I might as well just play Jushi. Jushi gets the Druganu spam out faster, which is what China does anyways. It gets Palace Guards earlier, which is what China does anyways. It gets the Grenadiers out faster, which is what China wishes it could do, but it costs too much for China to do it. So it's just like, why would you play China? Like, yes, in super niche scenarios, if you are like a China main, yeah, you can get like clock tower, nested bees, clock tower, springolds. Like those are neat, sure, but Jushi is just like, for the majority of players, Jushi is just a better version of the same faction. Everything just plays smoother, and you get Shaolin monks. Like it's so dumb, and I think this is like an absolutely terrible design for the game. It's harming the game, and it's currently also way overtuned. The Song Dynasty buff that you get, where your buildings are 40% cheaper in wood, is insane for doing your farm transition earlier. Everything just feels so much smoother with this faction compared to China. So if you're a new player, like, don't play China, just play Jushi. It does everything better. Yeah, I do not like this civ. And then also the thematics of it is just like, Jushi is, who's Jushi? Like, nobody in the West knows who Jushi is. People in China may know who he is, but he's not like the person that you'd want to base a civ off. At least like Saladin is like kind of like a big deal in the Middle East and in the West, and Jeanne d'Arc, you know, everyone knows about Jeanne d'Arc, so it's like I can sort of get why they would base a civilization around their personalities, but with Jushi, it's just like there's so many other people that you could have based the civ around, and even then, this civ doesn't really do much related to Jushi. Yeah, there's a couple landmarks that are like named after him, and sort of there's like some technology, there's more of a technology and the imperial official focus, but not really. Like when you're playing the civ, you're not thinking about your text that much, you're not thinking about imperial officials that much. Like it's just there. It's like another thing to do that plays basically the same way that you would play China. So super not a big fan of this civ at all. Probably the worst design civ. I really hope they just nix the civ and give us something better, like a Jin Dynasty China, like a China with like more nomadic cavalry focus or something like that. That'd be really sick. Oh my god, I want my iron pagodas. Where are my iron pagodas? All right, let's go into the base civs now. We'll just try to figure out where these guys get placed. China. We'll just go ahead and do that since we just did Jushi. I actually like China's design a lot. I think it does a really good job of making you feel the power of medieval China. The gunpowder focus is really good. The fact that you can boom in the Song Dynasty, get a lot of villagers out, get a lot of TCs up, just go crazy with your economy. The Imperial Official micro is very different from any other civ in the game aside from Jushi, and the units that they have are all very unique and add a lot to the game. So and the landmark identity, the fact that you can build both landmarks in each age and age up and go through different dynasties on top of the age ups, it all plays together very nicely, I think. I'm trying to think about anything I don't like with this civ design. I don't personally like playing it, I'll tell you that. It's a little bit complicated to play. I always mess up my macro whenever I'm playing the civ, and I kind of like go crazy. I think the units are not as punchy as I would personally like, but a lot of people like the Druganu rushes. It's just not for me. But overall, I think this is a really good civ design. I would not change a thing with this civ. This is a well-designed civ. Let's look at the Abbasids next. The Abbasids are another boomy civilization. They like to go multiple TCs. They care a lot about technologies, especially through their House of Wisdom. All of that feels really thematically consistent. I like the units that they have. The strong archers, camels is a little bit. There's a little bit too much of an emphasis on the Middle East and camels with this game series, but I get it. You want to add flavor where you can, and the Abbasids, you know, made use of camels, so might as well. I wish that the camels were a little bit cooler, actually. They don't seem like they do too much with the Abbasids. I mean, you do make camel riders a lot, but camel archers are like not something that you see too often because they're so damn expensive. The Ghulams are a terror. I really like that they added those Ghulams to the game. And aside from that, just like the booming identity that the civ has, overall I think it's pretty damn good. I'm trying to think if there's anything I don't like about this civ design. Is there anything I would change if I was trying to redesign the Abbasids? Yeah, no, I can't really think of anything right now. I would have liked to see Mamluks represented, but I mean, there is a technology with the Ayyubids called the Sultans Mamluks. It would have been cool to see Mamluks as a unit, though. Oh, I think the only thing I can think of with the civ I don't like is the wonder. The Abbasid wonder, the prayer hall of Uqba is just such a, doesn't even look like a wonder. This is kind of a dumb thing to dock it down on, but I think I wouldn't change a thing with the civ. It's somewhere very close to China. I'll leave it here for now and see how I feel about that. English. I think you guys know I like English. English is another civ I would not change a thing with. Really great starter civ, really great design. I'm glad that they picked the English because they knew that, with a largely English-speaking audience, that most people would be most familiar with this civ and probably pick it the most as well. They gave it a really cool, strong identity, focused around long-range archers, long-range keeps, high defense, really simple economy. You can transition to farming and just stop thinking about it. Your farms can generate gold, and you don't have to think about your macro that much. Really great for noobs, but also a lot of versatility. Also clear weaknesses. They build a really tight base, but their movement is not that high, so they can't really move around the map too much. I like the civ design. I have no issues with it. I think that the wine guard units maybe are a little bit uninspired. It's weird that we get these like super long range archers and these wine guard footmen that no one ever builds. That could be tried again. Maybe some of the landmarks could be a little bit more viable. So yeah, I'll actually put it a little bit lower than China and the Abbasids, actually. I think that's a little bit different than what I did previously. French, another civ that is a classic, a great civ for newer players who are starting out and, they've learned the basic economy game and now they want to start hurting people. It's also one of the, it's one of those civs that, like, you start out the game and you meet the civ and they just completely dominate you because you don't know how to defend against night raids, and it kind of it kind of weeds out people who are willing to actually learn this game versus people who are just trying it out and thinking that they're gonna have an easy time. The French knights basically teach you that this is a game that is gonna punish you if you make mistakes, and you have to learn what you're doing. Once you learn how to deal with it, the French night raids are actually very deal withable, and then you can you can deal with France, and then the French player has to start thinking on their toes, maybe make some arbitrage, maybe go into their econ more, maybe even consider making barracks units. French players notoriously never build their barracks because I don't know why their barracks doesn't get a buff from the keep. Their keep has an influence that makes archery units and cavalry units cheaper, but not barracks units. That's really weird that it doesn't also apply to barracks units. For that reason, nobody ever builds French men-at-arms, but French men-at-arms low-key look really, really sick. You guys should, if you guys haven't seen them yet, you should build them and check them out. Where would I place France? I think, yeah, I still would not change a thing with this civ. I think I have very few problems with it. You know what? I might place both the French and the English on almost perfect. The landmarks are a little bit, maybe could be a little bit better, I think, with the English, like Wineguard being something you never build, the Kings, the Abbey of Kings being something you would never build. Both are pretty slight balancing problems. I wouldn't place it and wouldn't change a thing. With the French, I think their infantry being so underwhelming is a little bit disappointing, but it's not too big of a deal. Is there anything else I would change? Are there landmarks that I wouldn't build? Oh, the trade landmark. Yeah, I'll put this here. It's almost perfect. The trade landmark with the French is a little bit confusing, and it's not something that anyone really builds. Yeah, it would be nice to see a change there. And the Red Palace is so strong that I rarely see the College of Artillery, which is a little bit of a shame because College of Artillery is really cool. But it's just like, why would you ever build that when the Red Palace just does so much more for you all up front? Yeah, so maybe some slight things I would like to see changed with this design. HRE, another new friendly civ, the final and third Pokemon, starter Pokemon in the game, the Squirtle of the bunch. It is a very good turtle civ. Great for building a very strong centralized economy around the Akenchopel. Great for making an infantry ball and just brain dead A-moving. Great for relics. And learning relics for that matter. It's kind of the civ that you first start learning relics with. Really great civ for noobs. Very easy to play. lacking in a little bit of versatility. Definitely doesn't have that many options as far as which units you want to go for. The landmarks that you go for are also very straightforward. You basically do the same thing every single time. There's almost no reason to build a mine work. In fact, the only reason you'd build a mine work is if you're actually playing the variant for the HRE Civ, and then you can think about it. So I think this Civ is would I place it? I would place it in good enough. I think like the lack of versatility, the lack of unique units with the Civ, when really HRE should have like, you know, a Hanseatic League related trade bonus, for instance, or like Teutonic Knights, or some kind of stronger knight unit. I feel like that would kind of round out the Civ a little bit better. For what it's currently at, it's just a little bit too linear. There's one right answer, and if you're not playing it, you're just not playing the Civ optimally. So I would like to see this Civ get a little bit of an update there. Next up is the Mongols. Okay, so the Mongols, I really want to like the Mongols. There's a lot of things that they do really right, but the Mongols are just a little bit not there. So for instance, they are designed around their uvus, which generate stone and also have an influence mechanic. But I remember watching a video that was talking about how the Mongols would migrate their base from uvu to uvu as their stone runs out, and it kind of plays into this like nomadic identity with the Mongols. That never happens in game, and the reason that never happens is for two reasons. One is that it's so fucking clunky to deal with the packing up and unpacking mechanic. It never works. Your buildings just don't do it. It just bugs out oftentimes, and it's just so like not smooth. And on top of that, like if you were like training a unit or researching a tech, it cancels it. You can't like hold on to, like, it would be awesome if you could like start researching it, and then as you pack up, the research just pauses, and then when you unpack and set it down, the building continues researching where it left off. Like, as an example, that'd be amazing. Or even better if you could actually keep on researching while you're moving around. That way you don't feel any loss of tempo as you're moving around. That would play awesome if your Civ actually played like a nomadic Civ, and if the packing and unpacking mechanic was smoother. Excuse me, the Civ would be incredible. As it is, it's so weird. Like they have strong cavalry with Keshiks and the Mongolai, that they have a really strong and unique identity around that. But the Mongolai are broken in team games, so because you could just run around and just kill all of your enemies eco. I remember those days, but because they were broken, they basically had to nerf the Mongolai to the ground, and now you basically never use Mongolai in 1v1s, which is arguably their most iconic unit in the game. The fact that it's the only horse archer unit that can gallop and shoot at the same time. It's a really cool unit, and I actually really like that. Like, it teaches you to build up defenses and not try to chase the Mongolai, which is historically accurate. You know, if you try to chase a horse archer, the horse archer is going to run away and shoot you down while you're doing it. So like, that frustration that I feel feels like frustration that my ancestors felt who were fighting the Mongols. Like, whenever I'm trying to chase down some Mongolai with some spearmen, I just like, I'm pulling out my hair, but it's like, I know exactly how my forefathers felt when they were doing that. That's really cool, and the fact that they gutted it for balance reasons is so lame. It would be nice to see like 4v, like the numbers for unit balancing change between 1v1s and team games. I feel like team games are just a very different game, and they should be balanced accordingly because of that. But I don't know, it might be too much of an endeavor. The Keshiks similarly, like, they are strong early, but then they fall off really hard late. They don't stand up to the other knights, which feels really bad, because as a result, Mongol late game goes heavy into infantry, men-at-arms and hand cannoneers. That's like their comp in the late game, which feels a little bit odd. So I actually, there's a lot of things that could be right. The Civ is like, it has a lot of really good ideas, but the way it is right now, this might be in the meh category or back to the drawing board. I'm gonna say it's in the meh category, maybe in the very bottom. Like, I would like this Civ to get reworked. There's a lot of changes I would like to see with the Civ, but it's not so bad and toxic that it's actually bad for the game, the way the Ayyubids and the Jushi Legacy are. So I'll keep it in the meh for now. Let's take a look at Rus. Rus is a civ I like a lot. It's the civ that I main, although I have been on a nine loss lose streak with them recently. Rus, they have the hunting mechanic. I'm not a big fan of the hunting mechanic. I like it in that it adds something different to the game. I like doing it when I'm playing the Rus, but it also adds this weird dynamic, and it doesn't work between team games and 1v1s, because in team games, you basically can't stop the Rus from getting all of the deer on the map. So it's like, why would you even try? But in 1v1s, you can compete for the deer. It's a little bit weird and gimmicky that they're the only civ that makes you kind of play for the deer. And if you're a new player and you just forget that there's a Rus player and you don't make a second scout, you just kind of get screwed. That feels really bad. So I think the deer hunting mechanic is a little bit too gimmicky. I would like to see something related to hunting, but as it is right now, it'd be nice if it got mixed up a little bit. Other than that, the knights are awesome. I love seeing Rus knights. They have some of the best designs in the game. All of their units look really, really cool. The men at arms also look really, really cool. And the landmarks all feel really good. They all feel like there's always a place for each of the landmarks. Their playstyle is very unique. The music is arguably the best in the game. I'm gonna say this civ is definitely in the almost perfect category. The only thing I would change is maybe re-looking into the hunting mechanic a little bit and seeing if there's a little bit if there's a way to make it so it's a little bit less gimmicky and plays in 1v1s and team games more fairly. Dehli. Okay. Many of you guys will know that I'm not a fan of the Dehli civilization. It doesn't have a very strong identity, in my opinion. Like, yes, it plays around sacred sites, and yes, it has elephants, but the sacred sites thing feels kind of gimmicky as well. And it's not necessarily something that I'm ever excited to do. I'm never like, oh wow, I really want to like play for sacred sites, so I'm gonna go for Dehli. And personally, I think the sacred sites in general are just like are a little bit underemphasized in the game. It would be nice to see sacred sites be have a more stronger central place in the game's balance. Maybe if there was like a continuous timer that ticked down instead of the timer being completely reset whenever you stop the sacred sites. That might make the game a little bit more interesting and the sacred sites more compelling to focus on. And then similarly, some of the maps just like sacred sites spawn either weirdly or spawn inconsistently, where some of the sacred sites, like, you know, some of them, depending on the map that you're playing, the sacred sites might just be inaccessible. Like if you're on hideout, you basically only get to have one sacred site, but if you're on I don't know, Dry Arabia, you can contest all three, as an example. If you're on King of the Hill, there's only one sacred site to get, so it just kind of nullifies the Dehli Sultanate's balance a little bit, the bonus that they get from having extra gold from sacred sites. So that just feels like some short-sighted thinking. And then if you had like multiple Dehli players on the same team in a team game, well, you know, who gets the sacred sites? Like, how do you balance that out? I just feel like this civ doesn't really work well in the 1v1 versus 4v4 context. It's more of a 1v1 focused design, I think, and I would like the civ to get rethought in a 4v4 context. And then similarly, the elephants they're there. They are good, but they're really slow, and they're not as scary or impactful as you might expect. To the point where Dehli doesn't necessarily need to make elephants to win the game. They more focus on just having a lot of infantry, even using the Ghazi Raiders to go right about. That's kind of more their focus, having a big mass of archers, a bunch of Ghazi Raiders, maybe some spears to build walls, and then that's basically it. Maybe you can have some sprinting men at arms, like that's pretty cool, but I would like to see more of an elephants focus with the civ, because it is the only civ in the game that has elephants, excluding the Byzantines, that is. But you don't really see the elephants being used all that much, and they don't push units, they don't do AOE damage. It just feels a little bit underwhelming in my opinion. So there's a lot of things I would like to see work out differently with the civ. Oh, and the biggest thing, of course, is the research mechanic. The research mechanic is so I don't like it. Like, each time you age up, you just like have to scurry around your base and like make sure you click on every single building, and you click up the research. You click on the research for the text for every single building. And if you ever forget to do that, like if I ever forget to, you know, build a blacksmith and research my text, I just feel terrible. It's just a terrible feeling. Basically you just you're just stupid. That's it. You know, if you aged up to castle and you forgot to start queuing up your text, you're just stupid. You just feel terrible, and there's no upside, you know. And it makes so much more sense that there should be some kind of like ticket system, or like some other way to just get rid of that negative feeling of just like, oh, I forgot to play the little mini game of getting all my text, so now I'm just screwed. Yeah, just in my opinion, this design needs to be rethought. It's not quite as toxic as the Ayyubid or Drushi designs, but it could definitely use a complete rework in my opinion. Mali, we're almost done now. These are the 2 anniversary civs that we have left. Mali is the only African civ, the only sub-Saharan African civ rather, and I really like that they included this civ in the game. It is not a civ that you see often represented, although it was in AOE2. I like that there's definitely a bit more of a focus on historical authenticity with AOE4's Mali compared to previously, where I think they had the Gebeto unique unit, which is like a warrior woman type of unit that is maybe inspired by the Dahomey Amazons. It was just a really weird, unique unit to give Mali, completely fantasy as far as I could tell. Now, the Dahomey Amazons do make another appearance in this game as well. Mali has hand cannoneers that are called Musafati Gunners. Their design is literally copied from the Dahomey Amazons, which is a all-women gunner unit. That didn't exist until the 1800s. That was featured in that movie Woman King, which is a really bad movie. Do not watch that movie. That movie is so trash. But it's cool to see them represented with this faction. That being said, I personally am not a fan of that Musafati Gunners being a Mali unit. I want to see another West African faction. I would like to see like Mali. You know, geographically speaking, Mali is a Sahel African empire, a West African Sahel empire. The Sahel is basically like the steppes of Africa. It's like this large plains, grassland, really good for horses. And the empires that get raised up there are very nomadically focused, not nomadically focused, but rather horse focused. Whereas if you go below the Sahel, you enter the Congo rainforest, the basin over there. Along the Guinean coast, then you're starting to see like the tsetse fly, where you basically can't have large beasts of burden, so horses can't really survive in the jungle, and as a result, you get much more interesting like heavy infantry and infantry regiments. So it's a very different culture between the Sahelian African empires and the coastal African empires, and I would like to see a different faction represent the coastal African empire, like Benin faction or something like that. I actually made a concept for that faction, and I think that the Dahomey Amazons fits much better with that potential faction than with Mali. Similarly, Mali, their infantry is a little bit. There's a lot of made-up units, like the Musafati warriors are a little bit made up. The Musafati warriors are also using swords. I think they're called Ada swords, which are also a Benin sword. Their javelin throwers are wearing armor that is reminiscent of the designs for the Isiminwenro, which is the Benin royal guard. So like, there's a lot of elements of like Benin and coastal African empires being borrowed in this Sahelian African empire, and that's not something that I'm a big fan of. But if there's only to be one African civ, I can see why they would go in this direction. I hope in the future that Mali does get reworked and does create space for other African empires in the future. The sofas, another thing I take an issue with. The sofas are historically were archers. They were basically slave servant archers that the Malians would mass up. They were known as horse guardians because they were the servants of the horse. They serviced the horses rather than being horse masters. And instead, the knightly equivalent for Mali should be called the Farima, or the Ferrari. It's a little bit unclear which one is the actual name to use here, but that is the knightly equivalent for Mali, and so it's weird that they're called sofas in the game. The warrior scouts also seem just made up as far as I can tell. It's a little bit weird that Mali didn't just get regular horsemen. But as far as gameplay goes, this faction's not for me, but I do like I do like that it plays so differently, and it has a very distinct identity when it plays. Right now, the most popular strat is just 1TC, do a cow boom. The emphasis on cows is, very historically authentic for this region, and then just spamming sofas and everything after that. It feels very interesting. Feels good in my opinion. I would design the Civ very differently, but I do like that their in-game identity is so distinct from all the other Civs. So I'm a little bit mixed here. I think overall I would say that this is a Civ that I would like to see get redesigned, especially for historically authentic reasons and to create space for other African factions. So I'm gonna put it a little bit below Mongols, but the gameplay wise does feel interesting and unique, and I have less issues with that. Let's finally take a look at the Ottomans. Now the Ottomans are they have a very interesting identity in this game. A lot of people, I feel like there's a lot of I don't know, Turkish nationalists or just people who are really into the Ottoman Empire who keep on arguing that they're too weak online. They're not. They're probably one of the strongest factions in the game right now, and they have the a completely unbeatable imperial age with Janissaries and mass great bombards, and it feels unbalanced in my opinion, but it is historically authentic for the Ottomans to have a really strong late game. I mean, towards the end of this medieval era is when the Ottomans are really in their heyday, so that's really cool. The Janissaries are a very interesting unit. They are hand cannoneers that are a little bit weaker than regular hand cannoneers, but they also can repair the great bombards, and they can also counter cavalry. They pair up with the great bombards like butter with toast. It's kind of amazing. The metters, microing the metters are the cavalry units that buff up nearby soldiers. Initially I didn't like them that much because you'd have to micro the specific unit, but over time they've really warmed up on me. They're really interesting because now you can actually have multiple metters that each play a different song, and you're kind of creating a little orchestra as you're assembling your Ottoman army. That feels really cool. The military schools also feel really cool. It's very distinct. The Ottomans are not too hard to play as far as their macro goes, but they have kind of one gimmick, which is the military schools, and then their whole Civ kind of is centered around that, and it makes the Civ's identity really distinct and unique. So I do like this Civ design a lot, and if I had to place them somewhere, I think this is a Civ I would not change a thing with. The Sipahi are a little bit of an issue. I think they're actually a Kensi or Delhi's historically. Their design is a little bit off. That's not what Sipahi should look like, but it's not too big of a deal. I guess Sipahi is more of a more popularly known unit, so maybe they went with that name. So yeah, I'll put it on the bottom of wouldn't change a thing. I would like to see Sipahi either get redesigned or renamed. The lack of a horse archer for the Ottomans is also a little bit of an issue. I might put this in almost perfect actually. Yeah. The lack of a horse archer type of unit feels a little bit off for a faction that kind of partially represents the Seljuks. But if they had horse archers, would that work with the rest of the Civ identity? You know what? Okay, I wouldn't change a thing. I like that the Ottomans are kind of slow rolling late game powerhouse. Great bombards just kind of creeping up with the Janissaries protecting it. It's a very unique identity. It plays well. It's fun to play. It's not my type of Civ, but I like that it's in the game. All right, cool. That's it. I think that's all of them. I think I rambled for almost an hour straight here. If you managed to listen through all of this, I hope you got something out of this. And yeah, feel free to like and subscribe if you want more AOE4 content from me. I think that's gonna be it. That's all from me. Stay frosty out there, guys. Stay chilly.